Liz Sheffield, talking about HR and HR tech. So Liz, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, so I would love to hear what brought you into the HR industry. Was it a fever dream or a young childhood aspiration in your ballerina costume? Thought HR, that's what I'm meant for.
It was a lightning bolt
about that.
And thank you again for inviting me, and to everyone who's here. This is just a great experience, and I love the community. I wanted to be sure and mention that. I came to the HR writing space from a career in HR. So I worked for Starbucks under the HR umbrella for just over 12 years, took a sabbatical for 6 months, went back to my desk job in corporate America and realized that I couldn't do that anymore. And that was when I decided to put my passion for writing to use and launched my own business. And initially I was writing articles and essays about parenting. Had 2 young kids at the time and was trying to make sense of all of that, and quickly realized that it wasn't going to be a lucrative, or it wouldn't build my income. So I talked to a mentor and she said, why aren't you writing about HR? HR people need copy related to HR. You have endless opportunities, and there are businesses that have budgets that can pay you for your writing. So that was my lightning bolt moment. And that was just over 9 years ago, or 9.5. You and I, when you mentioned a decade, I'm like, that's right, we're about the same time. And here I am, still writing about HR.
I think the natural next question is, can you do this if you don't have 12 years experience working for Starbucks in the HR team?
Yes, I think it has been very helpful. I won't lie about that, but I definitely think you can. Anybody who's worked anywhere has HR experience, right? You've interacted with the teams of HR, you've interviewed for jobs, and those are all the things that the functions that are selling to HR are doing. I think if you're a people person, that also helps, because HR is all about the people side of the business. So yeah, you can do it.
Yeah, and the mind-blowing part, so I'm going to pause and take a deep breath. Everyone here has been an employee, and HR exists to improve the employee experience. So it's like all of your experiences, frustrations, good things you wished had happened, all of that is relevant to HR and HR tech, especially when you start looking at sub niches like benefits and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and all these things that are current today.
Candidate experience. I have a friend who's been applying 100%. For tons of jobs, and she gives me a lot of fodder. I'll say that.
Yeah, and I bring myself as an example, because HR and HR tech is one of my strongest niches, and my only experience with that is getting laid off and then being freaked out about getting hired again. So I dove into, why does anybody hire anybody? Like, what's going on in this industry? And that's the only professional experience I brought to HR. So I think it helps to know that some companies really want people with HR experience, and they're looking for those SHRM credentials, and that's very valuable, and you should charge for that if you have it. If you don't have, that's not a reason
to not do it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, totally. So I wonder, what are some of the traits of the best writers in this industry? So for somebody who's going to be really successful here, you mentioned being a people person. Could not agree more.
Yeah, and I think some of this is based on my own approach, right? We all have our own writing approaches, but HR as an industry, people are looking for proof. So I think if you have that inquisitive spirit and are willing to dig in deep in the industry, follow people on social media, get engaged with the conversations out there, and do research. There is so much research related to the employee and the employer. And if you can bring that to your writing, I think it makes a big difference.
Yeah, and this kind of skips around questions, but when it comes to research, what are some of those places you go?
I can't believe we have a landline, and I'm so sorry, I forgot to.
That's actually me calling you just a minute.
Yeah, exactly. So one place that I cannot recommend enough is a person, but he has a big organization, and that's Josh Burson. So
Mhm.
he does all the analytics and he writes reports. His most recent, the state of 20 talent in 2021 or something. And he said, here's a little plug, that there is a $250 billion market for HR technology that's just related to recruiting, staffing.
Blinking.
Yeah, don't fall over. And then in addition to that, there's a $240 billion learning and development budget, sort of skills space. The market is that, because as we all know, there's the great resignation, there's a labor shortage, people are leaving at a mass exodus, and there are all these companies that are trying to help people in HR solve those issues.
Mm. Yeah, and I want to pull those threads apart a little, because I think that's something that we can forget if we're focused on HR just as this body that hires and fires people, which might have been our only experience, depending on where we've worked. But when you say things like the great resignation, I mentioned diversity, equity, and inclusion, benefits, and things like that. HR is basically the body that decides how a company will retain and hire and engage and inspire its workforce. So literally anything to do with communication, performance, engagement. There's this
Training.
whole cornucopia, training, upskilling. Like I can think of projects, several $1,000s of projects tied to each of those areas where there are technology products that meet those needs. So it's one HR person at a large company might purchase like 10 to 15 different technologies in the course of their time at the company. And each one of those technologies needs white papers and webinars and just this whole bevy of content. So it's not that when you're in HR, you're writing about hiring and firing. It's that when you're in HR, you're helping the entire ecosystem of people thrive. And so that it just explodes.
It's endless. That's one of the reasons I think I've been able to focus on this niche for 10 years, is that I'm not always writing about the same thing. There's never ending opportunities and different topics, so it doesn't get boring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned HR people are bubbly. I must admit that's part of the reason I focused on HR, is because when you niche into something, you're spending a lot of time with those people on the phone, you're emailing them a lot, you're interviewing them a lot, and they're always just so friendly. Like all the people go to HR. So I knew that as I was working with them, I would always have somebody friendly to talk to. So that was a big part of it.
That's a good plus.
So I wonder, so those are some good things. What about some common red flags, or maybe things to look out for, duck, before you step into HR?
So I really have had great experiences. So I struggled with, what would I say are some of the issues? Pamela hinted at this, but you do need, everybody thinks their product and service is the best, and that they should, but if you are writing about it or helping them with marketing content, you need to dig to make sure that you understand what that true pain point is. So the more that you can understand the pain point of the HR buyer, the better service you'll be able to provide. And also raising the red flag to them, saying, you can't just say that, we need some proof. And what came to mind was pricing. And because there are so many HR tech companies, and they are from all over the world, people are trying to get on this market. As Josh Burson mentioned, there's plenty of space in the market, and people are trying to grab some, and sometimes just some random cold calls. I'm just shocked at somebody, what they want to offer for a piece of content. So I just think the red flag is knowing your own value that you bring, and not being swayed by the idea of, this is a project, because if somebody is not willing to pay, even if you're a newer writer, a decent amount of money, then it's not worth it.
Yeah. And I wonder, are there very general lines we could draw with that? What does decent mean? So to me, I'm thinking under $200 for a thought leadership piece that is not a skilled niched writer. I think you're commanding between 500 and 700, I think.
Yeah.
And then it goes up with experience and complexity.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. And I found, I don't think that means you should never write for less. I certainly began my career $75 for, a job search site or something like that. if it was helping me build my portfolio and I could do that financially, I found that trade-off to be worth it. But I think when you start to niche and when you're investing time researching, when you've done this a couple times, there are companies that will intentionally try to lowball you, and that becomes a manipulative situation that you want to run away from.
Avoid. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyone who thinks that they deserve to have you write for them, general red flag.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's your red flag. I'll do a comedy segment on that. And I wonder, we mentioned the HR person tends to be really nice and a people person. Could you maybe talk about the typical person hiring in this space? So what do they care about and what are they looking for?
So I would break it into two groups. Recently, I've talked to people who are tenured marketers, but they're new to the HR space. Mm-hmm. So those people, I love working with them because, like you were saying, I bring a lot of experience and can help them ramp up and understand this specific niche. And those people are generally like, I love you.
So grateful.
Right. Yeah. And it's just a fun way to add value. And then I also love working with medium to large, because those folks, medium to large companies, and they have a full marketing team generally, and you can really go deep. You don't have to help as much overall. So whatever, they're like, we want a white paper. They know what they want. Here's your resources to contact. And then you can just be off and running deep in that project. And that's also really fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know why that makes me think, but recently I've come across a lot of smaller companies that it's almost like they're still figuring out their product and their positioning, and they don't know why it's special or why it works. And they want this white paper to do all the work for them. Right. And that creates this really extended editing process where everyone who looks at it ends up with a different idea of what the company's supposed to do. So it never gets finished. Yeah. So like you said, when it's a company that they've hired a tenured marketer, writing just isn't their skill. They just want to plug somebody in to do this. They want your expertise for if it's the best thing for them to do at that time. But otherwise, they know what they want. It's a really nice fit.
Yeah. And I also have found people that are selling HR products are generally also really great people.
Totally. Yeah. I'm trying to think of an exception and I can't. We'll have to send this to all of our clients.
Right.
So I wonder, so for the next question, we've talked about some of the big content themes already, a lot of them, but are there any that we missed? So how do you see things like digital transformation, change management? What topics tend to pop up when you're writing about HR?
Yeah, so echoing again what Pamela said, like there's so much about the return to work right now. Mm-hmm. Just like HR is like in the hub of everything related to employment, everything that's outside in the world is actually related to employment too. So current events are actually very big. Mm-hmm. If there's something going on in the world, it's going to be a topic that somehow affects HR. So like you said, diversity and inclusion, when we finally started talking about race and inequity, that became a big topic for HR, and it still is, thankfully. And people, there's worries, there's concerns about AI and robots. Are they going to take over all the jobs? They're not. But that has become, so that's, people are wanting to talk about that. And part of my background is in ethics and compliance. And I think, so in times like it, I wasn't writing in the HR space at this time, but like when Enron happened or when there's financial conflicts of interest, stuff like this. And Mindy will talk more about that, but those topics directly hit HR because they have to scramble to protect their company. So in turn, people who are selling to HR need to be talking about those same topics.
Yeah, and it strikes me that HR is one of those industries where people write marketing products to sell a product, definitely. That's why it's happening. But I think they also write a lot more, I don't mean this in a bad way, but for the vanity or the ego of it, to really have thought leadership out there. Like companies that have nothing to do with diversity, equity, inclusion will write HR and DEI pieces on that topic just to have a presence in the conversation. So
Yeah.
you end up having an opportunity to write about HR for non-HR and non-HR tech companies. And then another way I see that is they want their HR thought leaders, they want their HR executives to become thought leaders. So they will hire a writer for those executives to be putting out content, even though it's not an HR and HR tech company. So just opportunities. That's why I'm there too. And I wonder, there was something there in there. Yeah. And I think HR is such, like you, exactly what you said, it's connected to everything because employees are what makes a company, like source of innovation, source of productivity, profitability, all that stuff. So when you're talking about HR and employees, you're really talking about the economy and the state of innovation and business disruption and how technology changes people at work. So it's like this spiral of fascinating subjects that you never would have thought come in HR end up being HR.
Yeah.
It'd be really fun.
And maybe that's a word of caution. You can go down a lot of rabbit holes.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of, I think it's fun to share some of the random assignments. So there's a lot of learning management systems and then learning management systems that cross explicitly with franchises like restaurants and gyms and stuff.
Yeah.
Several assignments from there. Lately, business technology that has to do with compliance. So secure e-signatures and stuff.
Right.
There's several companies, I won't mention, doing a lot of work in those areas. So it's like all these little intersections. There's an opportunity for you.
Yeah, I wrote for it was a company that had a course development software. It's a startup, and they had me write a course about how the course software could be used for marketing. So like this, wow. It took me a minute to like, how does this work? It was fun.
And for former teachers, curriculum development for an LMS and training and development, that can be a whole field as well, if that's your specialization.
Yeah.
Yeah, super cool. So Jim asked the question, does HR and age bias intersect in a big way?
Oh, yeah.
How did you tackle that?
Yeah. It's a huge topic for HR, and a lot of systems are being released to try to any kind of bias, really, to limit the bias in the application, in the interview process. So I've written for a lot of people that do, now I'm spacing on the word, but tests, like assessments prior to hiring. And those are to try and get everybody's skill set, not seeing them. There are people that now there's interview systems that remove names and other kind of identifying characteristics, like a degree that you've received or a date you received it from application before it goes to any hiring managers. Yeah, so HR has come under fire for existing biases, and now there's a lot of people trying to break into that.
Yeah, and Jim, I think there might be deeper to go with that too when you're talking about ideating for different content pieces, because age bias might be the topic, but it might not be the subject or the title or the really what you're talking about. That just might be a category of things to talk about. So when you talk about bias, age is one of them, race, gender, all this stuff. It all maps together. And so once you dig into the niche, then you start being able to fill this mind map out for yourself of how these things fit together. Because it's definitely not going to be a company writing an article that just says age bias is wrong. That's too simple at this point. That's not even the start of the conversation. It gets a lot more complex from there.
Although it is wrong.
Yes. So I wonder if you have any maybe final thoughts. I think my favorite question is what do you think the secret to climbing up the pricing chain is in HR? So as much as you're willing to share, what kind of marks beginning writers from senior writers, and what do you bring to the table as you move up in how much you're charging?
So I think that, and maybe I hinted at this earlier, but really establishing yourself in the industry, being out there in the conversations so that people see your name and know who you are. I did my own survey of HR buyers. So I was able to provide that for clients, showing them that not only am I taking the time to do this research? But I know people will respond to my surveys. I have a network. I did spend the time and the money to get my HR certification, and I think that has really helped. Not everybody, but in a few, cases with clients. And yeah, I think it's just really, I do think anything, that's the value of the niche, is showing that this is where you're focused, and people appreciate that. It takes a little time, but just each step, and maybe you probably already say this in the B2B Writing Institute, is just continually review your rates and know that with each piece, you're getting better, and each client.
Perfect. And I see Denise had a question. Maybe we could address that real quick before we move to the next one. But do big HR companies work with solo writers, or do we need to go through an agency to find work?
I've had both. So I have some big HR marketing clients they found me through LinkedIn and have worked with them for years, and one that found me through Twitter. And then I've had other companies where the work came through the agency. So there's a non-answer. I guess it's both.
Yeah, I've had the same.
Yeah.
And I think maybe the way to think about it is that HR is like a cross section through all companies ever. So any company might need an HR thought leader writer because they want to build the thought leadership of their executives. And then there are HR tech companies that want to sell. So it's like a different kind of writing you can do for anyone in the HR space. Whereas not every company has a retail department. Every company has an HR department.
Yeah.
It's magic.
It's not just HR tech. I want to add that in. There's a lot of HR tech, but there's a ton of people selling HR consulting, HR workshops, HR other kind of programs and products. So that adds to the industry too.
Cool. And so before we move to the next speaker, I did want to mention, Liz, you have the whole community just for transitioning into HR writing. Yes. So if this ends up being something people like, you are here to
come
coach
to me
and teach. You can't find a better person to learn from.
As a side note, if you enjoyed our conversation today, I want to encourage you to check out the B2B Writing Career Kickstarter. This is the all-in-one class that introduces you to B2B, helps you figure out your niche, and then a couple times a year, we actually get together and write your first clips together. If you'd like more information about that, just click the link in the course below or head to b2bwritinginstitute.com. Thanks for joining.